Coming up this week, Chevy unveiled the Bolt EV refresh and Bolt EUV. Tesla cuts prices on Models 3 and Y. Jaguar is going full electric, and more. Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 53 of the EV Resource Podcast. My name is Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and answers to your questions about electric vehicles. Before we get started with the news this week, I want to thank our podcast partner, Titan Auto and Tire in Moseley, Virginia, for their support. Titan is one of the very few independent shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs, and from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. That's TitanAutoTire.com. Kicking things off for us this week, Tesla has updated pricing across the Model 3 and Model Y lineup, including significant price cuts for both base models. With the price update, Tesla has now reduced the price of the Model 3 Standard Range Plus to $36,990, a $1,000 reduction. And Tesla has reduced the price of the Model Y Standard Range by $2,000, now to under $40,000 at $39,990. This is great news for people who might have been waiting to buy their Tesla, me, especially great for families looking at the Model Y, my family. And it's worth noting that this price reduction could be in response to the new tax incentive bill that was reintroduced recently, as there's a good chance that many people decided to wait to see what happens to the bill before pulling the trigger on their purchase. Me again. This is all speculation, of course, that other people are going to be like me, but Tesla has said in the past that they do adjust pricing based on demand. So if people are holding off because they want to potentially save $7,000 on this year's tax bill, then, that could significantly affect demand for those that were planning on purchasing during the first quarter of this year. But there's another potential reason. Tesla makes continuous improvements to its production process and to the vehicles themselves to make them more efficient and cost effective. With this price reduction, instead of just increasing the profit margin for the vehicles, Tesla could be signaling that they're just passing some of the savings on to customers. Now, whatever the reason is, one thing that is really exciting is that if this additional $7,000 tax credit or incentive is passed, and if Tesla doesn't raise prices back up again, you could be looking at getting a base Model 3 for less than $30,000. That is just spectacular. So what do you think the reason is? Are you just as excited as I am about the price cuts? Are you holding off buying because you're waiting to see what happens with the tax incentive bill? Let me know in the comments of the video or send an email to hello@ev-resource.com. Next, joining the growing field of brands going electric, Jaguar Land Rover has announced this week that Jaguar and Land Rover models will be offered with an electric powertrain by the end of the decade. The Jaguar brand itself will become an electric-only luxury brand from 2025 onwards, and Land Rover will be launching 6 EV variants within the next 5 years, one of them being the very first all-electric Land Rover due in 2024. By the end of the next decade, Jaguar Land Rover is aiming for 100% of Jaguar sales and 60% of Land Rover sales to be fully electric. Currently, their only all-electric vehicle that they do sell is the Jaguar I-Pace, designed by Jaguar and made by Magna. And there is another brand that is also making plans to go all-electric, in some places anyway. Ford Motor Company this Wednesday said its car lineup in Europe will be all-electric by 2030 as the automaker races to get ahead of European emissions targets and looming bans in some countries on fossil-fueled vehicles. According to Reuters, the car maker said it will invest $1 billion over the next 30 months to convert its vehicle assembly plant in Cologne, Germany, to become their very first electric vehicle facility in Europe. Ford said its first European-built all-electric passenger vehicle will be produced at the facility from 2023, and it's considering building a second model there as well. It's worth noting that Ford has a strategic alliance with Volkswagen Auto Group, under which they will use Volkswagen's MEB electric vehicle platform to build some of these models. Ford's assembly plant in Cologne, Germany will be the first to use the MEB platform. By 2026, Ford says they will have electric versions of all of their passenger vehicles on sale in Europe, and that by 2030, 2/3 of commercial vehicle sales in Europe will be fully electric or plug-in hybrids. The company said that by 2024, it will have available plug-in hybrid or fully electric versions of its entire commercial vehicle range. There was no announcement on when we can expect Ford to go full EV here in North America, and honestly, I wouldn't hold your breath for that to be announced anytime soon. Next, after 4 long years, the Chevy Bolt EV has its mid-cycle refresh with lots of asked-for features, and we also get to see its bigger sibling with Super Cruise, the new Chevy Bolt EUV. So what's new and how are they different from each other? Well, this week I'm turning to Electrek for this because they have shared a massive amount of details about both vehicles. For the Bolt EV refresh, the redesign brings with it a distinct front fascia that is definitively more serious looking. Gone is the happy looking front with a black bar bridging the headlights and the standout gold bow tie. In its place is a more consistent, sterner facade with a much closer in color lower grille and lone center black emblem. The new high-eye LED daytime running lights squint under the hood, doubling as sequential turn signals. LED headlights replace the HID xenon bulbs from the first generation, wrapping around the sides. Combined, it now looks more like an electric vehicle than a gas one. Perhaps the best part of the update is the vastly improved, more contemporary interior, with more soft-touch fabric and surfaces. Gone is the cheap plastic feel of the first-generation Bolt, replaced with a much sleeker, color-consistent premium feel, available in all black or two-tone gray. While everything is fundamentally in the same place, it all looks and feels streamlined and sexy. The floating infotainment system is replaced with a fully integrated unit flush in the dashboard. A 10.2-inch screen and simplified button layout promise an all-new user experience. Only 2 dials and 3 buttons are on the left side of the display, very close to where the driver's right hand will be. This will make it much easier to use, especially without looking. The anachronistic stick shifter has been consigned to the dustbin of history. A set of more intuitive buttons control the car now. One pedal driving has a dedicated toggle that will retain its setting between starts, one of the most common requested updates. Sport mode, traction control, and lane keep assist buttons are above it. A phone pouch to the right of the transmission selector buttons provides standard wireless charging. Wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto also come standard, allowing us to finally rid ourselves of phone cables in the car. There are also USB-A and USB-C ports for faster wired charging, if that's your thing. There's another slot just above it, which looks like it might be for an SD card. The 12-volt accessory outlet remains, although there's no 120-volt AC outlet to be found. The HVAC controls have a premium look, now fully separated from the infotainment display. This returns to the discrete buttons that many owners preferred. Being able to get haptic feedback by touching physical buttons means that you can change things without your eyes leaving the road, a task difficult with touchscreens. GM is claiming a brand new instrument panel, but it looks very similar to before. If anything, it's a little shorter with the battery and power gauges compressed. For those too lazy to look at the infotainment system, a clock has been added in the upper left. The steering wheel is slightly upgraded. There's now a jog wheel on the right and a similar toggle wheel on the left. The Regen on-demand paddle now peeks up from behind the left side, begging to be used. The bottom of the wheel is a bit flatter, affording slightly more legroom when getting in and out. Next part, incredibly important, and finally addressing the most common complaint with the original Bolt EV, much more comfortable seating. The front seats have been entirely redesigned with much more cushion and proper side and adjustable lumbar support. The center armrest is longer, with cup holders moved further back than before, and it all just looks and feels significantly better and more premium. So what's different about the Bolt EUV? Well, it has a body that is 6 inches longer than the Bolt EV, ironically giving it more of a sedan look and less stubby than the EV. 3 of those 6 inches go to the rear seat. The front seats and trunk are the same, so the other 3 inches must be in the front of the car, extending the nose slightly. Note that this increase in length adds almost 100 pounds to the weight, so the performance of the EUV should be slightly less than the Bolt EV. While GM is quick to call the Bolt EUV taller and wider than the EV, it's only 0.2 inches in both. So unless you're pulling out a ruler, it's effectively the same size. The Premier edition of the Bolt EUV will have optional navigation built into the infotainment system. Keep in mind, with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay being wireless, you can use your choice of navigation apps on any version of both the EV and EUV. No exterior metal body panels are shared with the Bolt EV. An entirely new body gives subtly unique styling differences, appearing a bit more muscular and sleeker. Other than the slight increase in the rear seat, perhaps the biggest difference with the EUV is the optional Super Cruise. This finally gives the Bolt adaptive cruise control, a feature conspicuously missing from the first generation to the perplexity of many Volt owners. Only standard Super Cruise with lane centering and adaptive cruise control will be available. Building on the success of the first generation, both the EV and EUV keep the fundamentals the same as the first generation. Everything underneath it all is pretty much in the same place, and both the EV and EUV share the same propulsion components as before. This includes the single permanent magnet 3-phase AC 150 kilowatt motor, and that puts out 200 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque. And due to the weight of the EV being almost exactly the same as its pre-refresh predecessor, you can expect the same performance feel, about a 7-second 0 to 60 mile an hour, and with the EUV, due to the increased rate, you can expect it to be slightly slower. The transmission, as it were, is still the same. It's a single fixed 7.05 to 1 gear reduction. The 17-inch Michelin Energy Saver tires and 17-inch wheels have still stuck around with the same rotors, brakes, ABS, regen first braking, and traction control. The size of the front seat and trunk are pretty much the same as before, even in the EUV. Sadly, the EV and EUV will be carrying over the same towing capacity as the first generation Bolt EV, according to GM, and that is to say, none. So while towing is possible, it's not rated for towing. This is unsurprising considering that the powertrain hasn't been changed. Last and certainly not least, against the hope of many, it has the same 66 kilowatt hour battery as the first generation. However, it's being listed as 65 kilowatt hours, presumably now with a 1 kilowatt hour buffer. That buffer might be due to the ongoing recall for the earlier models as an added measure of safety. The improved styling might also have led to a bit more aerodynamic efficiency, which the original Bolt was not great at. The EV gets to keep the same 259-mile EPA-rated warm weather range as before, and of course the heavier EUV gets a slightly lower 250 miles. DC fast charging is finally standard, but it's retaining the same 55 kilowatt rate and charge profile as before. The EV will get the same 100 miles in 30 minutes under ideal charging conditions from starting below 25% battery state of charge, while the EUV will get 95 miles in the same 30 minutes. Affordability for these vehicles has always been critical, and they want to make it more attainable for everyone. So the Bolt EV starts at $31,995, with the Bolt EUV starting at $33,995. Potentially what's best is that they will be available very soon. Both vehicles start production later this spring and will have availability in early summer. Because of the shared components between the two, they will be able to pivot the proportions to meet demand, up to 25% of one and 75% of the other. They are targeting being able to produce more of both than they did with the first generation. So I know that was a lot to take in. I'm glad that we got through it. These are definitely new vehicles. I am super excited. Honestly, I think the styling is much better. All of the changes they made were drastically needed. The one thing I wish they would have done is increased the DC fast charging rate at least to 100 kilowatts. That is kind of a bummer, honestly. And it means that if you're looking for a car to take road trips with, then the Bolt EV and now EUV still probably aren't going to be your best bet. All right, and the last news story for you this week comes from Inside EVs. After Volkswagen delayed the market launch of the ID4 model in the US from late December to the first quarter of this year, now the first customers are reporting that deliveries will begin in March. According to a member of the forum VW ID Talk, going under the name I'd Rather Drive Electric, ID being in capitals there, the ID4 first edition should be delivered by the end of next month. Saying, quote, "Just got a call from my dealership's EV specialist. He said my first edition ID4 would be at the dealer by the end of March and the display models will be there a few days before," end quote. Another forum member wrote that he contacted his dealer, who also confirmed that the demo cars are coming. In other words, one of the most anticipated new mainstream EV models soon will enter the market, basically within weeks. All the VW ID4 currently ordered are to be produced in Germany, but at some point in the future, the company will produce them locally here in the US. At least that's if they solve the battery supply issue after the SK innovation ban. But I digress, and that was something I actually covered last week. So what do you guys think of the ID4? Is it something that you've been looking forward to? Would you buy one, or have you one on order? Let me know. I'd love to hear it. So I've done it again with the weekly Q&A. I forgot to post on Facebook. So only one person, actually I posted this morning, but only one person has responded. So I'm going to carry it over to next week. The question being, what is one thing that you learned after buying an EV that you wish you would have known beforehand? So I suppose I'll take the time to tell you my answer to that question. And really, it's quite simple. The one thing that I wish I knew before buying my EV that I learned, of course, through owning it and after the fact, was that non-Teslas can be a lot of fun too. You know, beforehand, I knew there were other EVs out there, obviously, because I bought one, but I'd only ever driven Teslas. I'd only ever test driven Teslas. And the impression that I got was that they were really fun, but I really wasn't expecting the Chevy Spark EV, being a small little city car, to be more fun to drive than my wife's tuned Volkswagen GTI gas-powered car. I mean, her car's got a turbocharger, it's tuned so it's got like 300 horsepower, and it's a lot of fun. But given the opportunity, and it didn't take very long, I would choose, and still to this day would choose, to drive the Spark EV around town than to drive her car. And the reason for that, what makes it so fun, is that you have an immediate response when you push your right foot down. You know, you step on the throttle and you don't have to wait either for the car to change gears so that the engine RPM is in the power band, or for a turbocharger to spool up. It's just an immediate response, and then you're rocket ship. You're gone like a roller coaster. That never gets old. I love that feeling. It is way more fun than it should be, probably, because it's only a matter of time before I'm going to get myself in trouble with it. But I didn't know that before buying my EV. I didn't know that it was going to be so much fun, because honestly, I probably would have pulled the trigger a lot sooner had I known that. The reason I got my car is because it was an economical thing. I mean, every month that I drove that instead of driving my Honda Civic, I was saving about $50. You can't beat that. So it wasn't about fun to me, but I learned very quickly that EVs are fun. A lot of fun. And actually, in what time is it? In less than 2 hours, for the first time ever, I'm going to drive the Smart for 2 electric drive. So the electric version of the smart car, the really, really, like, I think it's one of the only cars out there that's smaller than mine. But knowing ahead of time, I'm expecting it to be really fun. But the big reason I'm looking at that car is because I haven't before. I've never seen one, that I've driven one, and the opportunity came up. It's sitting at a used car lot, and I'm going, hey, I want to go check it out. So actually, I'll report back next week on how that is. And actually, I'm thinking about putting like a little vehicle review together, maybe an article. So if you follow along on Facebook or the blog on the webpage, keep an eye on that, because I have a feeling I'm going to put something out there. All right, so that is your show for this week. Thank you so much for watching on the YouTube channel or listening on your favorite podcast platform. Please share this with your friends. Write a review on Apple Podcasts if you are able to do so. Good, bad, otherwise, actually, any review will help bump up the EV Resource podcast in the way they work the algorithms. So anything you want, rate it, 5 stars, 1 star, whatever. Our Patreon executive producers are Tom Wiggins and Rajiv Narayan. If you want to support the EV Resource podcast, you can check us out there at patreon.com/EV Resource. As always, I invite your feedback via email to hello@ev-resource.com. You can always leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll get all the future shows delivered to you automatically. If you want to listen to any of the previous podcast shows, you can find them on the webpage under the podcast section or on many of the major podcast platforms. Thank you so much for being with me, and I'll catch you next week.